We are beginning our next panel. It's entitled The Future of Wealth, and it's produced by UBS. Women are gaining influence and stature in nearly every sphere of society. Yet, despite their progress, inequality persists. As women embrace their economic potential, they are increasingly able to address these imbalances through the choices they make with their wealth. Whether as an individual, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, or an investor, women can help change lives. Building on UBS Optimist Foundation's experience, we will explore the potential of blended finance, combining philanthropy and investing to attract more and better funding to reach the UN SDGs. The chair of this panel is Dr. Mara Harvey, Head of Client Services of Global Wealth Management at UBS. Just some housekeeping notes before we hand over to the moderator. I would ask all participants, please stay within the 50-minute time frame, as we need at least 5 minutes for the next panel to prepare and go live. May I ask that everyone switches off their phones? If you lose connection, not to panic, just to try to log in again through the same link. We have a questions and answers section where the moderator can see and take live questions to raise with all panelists. Mara, I'll pass the floor on to you.
Many thanks indeed, Marco, and it's absolutely delightful to be hosting this panel today. So indeed, women and wealth, there is much to be said about this theme, and it is fantastic to see how so many women are more and more empowered around the globe to take influence together with their wealth. So today we'd like to share with you essentially three things. We want to talk about the many paths to impact that women and men can have in the different roles they play and how they deploy their wealth. We want to talk about innovation that is making what was previously only philanthropical investable today. And last but not least, we want to really showcase concrete impact, what is working, how do we scale up, and what are the lessons that we can learn from all of this. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the co-panelists who will be providing you with really insightful experiences today. My colleague, Maya Ziswiler, who is our head of philanthropic programs and social finance at UBS. Hello, Maya. And Nayantara Watsa, who is the director of innovative financing at Living Good. Hello, Nayantara. Thank you for being with us. So if we can just pull up the slide deck, I'll be happy to jump straight in. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So indeed, in our conversations with female clients across the globe, we see very often a key question come up again and again, and that is, how can I have more impact? How can I influence the world around me? And how can I deploy my wealth for more purpose and making the world a better place? And indeed, this is what I have the privilege to focus on in my role at UBS as head of client services. We essentially help clients to answer that question, be it questions around how can I have more impact as an individual? How can I connect with other change makers? But also questions around how can I engage my family in a common cause and defining something that really rallies us all behind it and where we can all get engaged. And if I'm active as an entrepreneur, how can I also use my business to amplify the impact that I'd like to have? When it comes to philanthropy, I think one of the hardest questions is to really know whether your philanthropy is generating meaningful outcomes and how do you go about impact measurement? And of course, last but not least, daily investments. This is at the core of what we do every day. Are you steering your investments to those outcomes that you could potentially achieve with them? Have you taken an active approach to this? Are you thinking about what is your money doing every day while you're busy working? Well, there are many paths that can lead you to having more impact. And the beautiful thing is that they really reinforce each other. Whether we are looking at the world through the lens of an individual or a family, whether we are looking at the world through the lens of an entrepreneur, whether we are engaging with clients in their role as philanthropists, or whether we are having a conversation with them as investors, strictly speaking, every single one of these roles that we all play in one shape or form or the other can have potentially much more positive impact. So this is what we enjoy doing. This is what we believe can really help deploy much more private capital towards the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. We're all conscious about the fact that sustainable investing alone is not going to get us to net zero, but it is a very important step in the right direction to be much more mindful about the positive elements that we can embed into our decision taking if we do so mindfully. If we can go forwards, please. Thank you so much. So whether we look at things precisely through the lens of a family and we ask ourselves, how can we create a legacy that will last for generations? How do we get the next generation involved in what we're doing today? Will they be the ones taking over a family business? Will that purpose that we define for ourselves today live on beyond us? And how will we maintain cohesion in the way our family assets are managed? And for certain families, of course, that we serve around the globe, their wealth is so sizable that the question of structure and governance and family offices can be extremely relevant in institutionalizing the approach that they take to defining their purpose and their impact. And even more importantly, it's about understanding what are people's passions and what drives them. And for passion, it could be anything. It could be collecting. It could be a passion for art. It could be a passion for fast cars. It could be collecting wines. And for many people, collecting is not just an expression of their passion, but it is a way of conserving wealth and transmitting something that one has put a lot of time, effort, blood and sweat into to the next generation so that that passion might be shared over time. But what we see emerging today is a real willingness to think about how can my collecting be more conscientious? Can I do good also with my passion? Can I embed elements of philanthropy in the way I look at collecting? Or could I drive social change by making sure, for example, that I apply a gender lens or an ethnic lens to the way I collect? So these are all questions that we think are super relevant to our clients today, and we enjoy very much engaging with them on it. If we can go to the next slide, please. And the topic of today that we really want to focus on is around philanthropy and giving back. And today, I think philanthropy has evolved from the notion of just giving away to giving back more broadly. So to understand how to define a program, how to fund a program, what kind of solutions work in the field that I want to deploy my effort and my assets towards, how can I leverage other people's resources? How do I team up? How do I even measure what I want to achieve? And that is probably one of the biggest challenges for any program. How can I make a significant difference? How can I involve generations beyond me? And what innovation is happening in this space today? Well, this is where my colleague Maya will be able to share with you what we are doing at UBS and with the Optimus Foundation, how we are making philanthropic endeavors not just investable, but really innovating at the leading edge of scaling up to find solutions that will contribute more strongly to the Sustainable Development Goals. So Maya, without further ado, over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Mara. And as Mara mentioned, I'm part of the UBS Optimus Foundation, and it was actually set up 20 years ago by UBS to help clients have more impact with their philanthropy, to ensure that we can ensure not only more, but also better money towards reaching the SDGs, specifically in the areas of education, health, child protection, and the environment. We actually have a team of 50 people that are experts in this areas. We've deployed more than 250 million Swiss francs of grants and social investments and have reached almost 4 million people thanks to this funding. But the most important point here is, how do we get to reaching the SDGs, and how do we make sure that we fill the $2.5 trillion annual gap that we need in order to solve the world's most pressing social and environmental programs? And that gap was there, that number was there even before the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's made it even bigger, and especially for the most vulnerable. So while philanthropy is actually been growing, philanthropists are giving more than ever before, philanthropy alone will not help us solve these problems. Government funding alone won't be enough. Collective action is needed, and it's needed in order to reach those goals. So private sector capital, whether it be through businesses or through investors, is going to be a critical point. But if I move on to the next slide, we've seen that private capital is often not able to reach the most challenging, to address the issues of the most vulnerable. And impact capital is actually not deployed equally. We know, for example, that health and education remain underfunded. And the Global Impact Investing report actually states that impact capital, of the impact capital deployed, only 3% is actually deployed to education, to give one specific example. So one, I think, solution to try and address the SDGs is by looking at the concept of blended finance. So blending philanthropic and public capital with private capital, allowing different stakeholders to invest alongside each other, each achieving its own objectives, with philanthropic and public capital really focused on ensuring that there is impact reach for the most vulnerable, and private capital that it's there to ensure that there is more funding that is available. So the way that we like to think about it is not only more funding, but really better funding. And that better funding is about making sure that the capital is deployed towards areas that actually reach the most vulnerable and actually are measurably linked to reaching the SDGs. And so one possible solution within the blended finance world are impact bonds. And unlike the name suggests, impact bonds are actually not bonds. They're results-based funding contracts between different parties. So here's how they work. An investor provides upfront capital to fund a program. Let's take an education example, for example. So to ensure that learning outcomes are improved. If and only if that program reaches its targets, then another funder, an outcome payer, usually a government, will pay the investment back based on the outcomes that are being achieved. So it's really linking the social outcomes with the financial return. It's ensuring that incentives are aligned so that everybody is fulfilling not only its social targets. So from a government perspective, the focus is ensuring that children, the most possible children, are actually learning. And from an investor perspective, it's interested surely in the social return, but also in maximizing its financial return. So if we move on to the next slide, you can see that we've had, as the Optimus Foundation, a solid track record in investing in these types of programs where financial return is directly linked with social returns. So we were one of the first to design an impact bond in the education space, where it was about making sure that girls go to school and are actually learning. As a result, we got a 15% IRR return. Most recently, with our Quality Education India DIB, which aims to improve learning for 200,000 children in India, what we've seen based on an independent evaluation is that the children in these programs are actually learning twice as fast as children that are not part of the program. So again, it's the more children are learning, the better the outcomes on the social side, but also on the financial side. But really the question is, what's next? You know, we've been successful at investing in these bespoke contracts where we've seen really positive results. But if we want to get to scale, if we want to ensure that we're able to reach the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we need to go beyond these bespoke programs to actually getting to scale. And that's where we're really excited to be thinking about an impact bond fund that is pooling funding from different types of investors, blending those different investment capital to get to a point where we'd be able to invest $100 million into impact bonds into actually programs that will help reach the SDGs. And that blending will be a blending of philanthropic capital that will take a first loss position that will be de-risking the investments for other funders, but also boosting their returns. And then combining that with commercial capital, so making sure that that enables commercial capital to come in at a risk return profile that is more appropriate for them, but then crowding in that additional scale, that initial amount of funding. And on the other side, what we've done is really work also with the broader set of players, the governments, to make sure that there's funding available to pay for outcomes. So the World Bank, the UK government, different governments that have actually committed to paying for outcomes that are being achieved. So ultimately, what we aim to do is create this kind of blended finance mechanism where financial returns are really based on true impact. They're uncorrelated to financial markets, and it's really about making sure that incentives are aligned to improve social outcomes and also enable some financial returns. So I'm really excited to be able to also introduce Nayantara Watsa, one of our long-standing partners, to give an example of the types of programs that a fund like this might be able to invest in. Over to you, Nayantara.
Great, thanks, Maya. It's a pleasure to be here. As Maya mentioned, I currently work at an organization called Living Goods, and I'm based in Nairobi. But my background is that I grew up in Bangalore, a city in the southern part of India. And then moved to the US for college and then grad school, where I, very actively pursued a career in international development, very much focused on global health, but also in the crux of really health and business. And how those two can come together to really solve, social problems in developing country contexts. I was very interested in coming back and living and working within a developing country context to give back a little bit, and I've been here in Nairobi for about 4 years, working with Living Goods. And in the past, I've also collaborated in other roles with UBS and other organizations on some of the impact bonds that Maya mentioned earlier in India as well. Just to tell you a little bit about what Living Goods does, we're really focused on the leading causes of child deaths. And we do this by really leveraging simple and affordable solutions that are integrated into one efficient platform. So our network of community health workers, who are often government recruited and government trained community health workers, we empower them with a technology platform that allows them to kind of standardize the way that they approach beneficiaries within their community. So they go door to door with this technology. They're able to ask standardized questions on symptoms, diagnose, and then treat the biggest killers of childhood. The biggest causes of childhood deaths, malaria, pneumonia, and diarrhea. They also really support some other health areas, including pregnancy and newborn support, as well as family planning, immunization, and nutrition. Living Goods has been working in Kenya and Uganda since about 2007. And in 2014, we did a randomized control trial on our model in Uganda that showed a 27% reduction in mortality among children under 5. So very significant results in the way that this model that was really focused on combining technology and performance management of community health workers, was able to achieve. And you'll see on this slide some of the results that we achieved in 2019, very significant results on the number of pregnancies we were able to support, the number of sick children we were able to assess, treat, and then further refer onto public health facilities if they needed more intensive care. And similarly, the number of immunization defaulters that we've been able to track, and all of this at a cost of around $2.87 per person that we've been reaching within these communities. We currently have about over 10,000 community health workers active in Kenya and Uganda, serving almost 8 million people. as Maya mentioned, one of the opportunities that we have been working on is a results-based financing mechanism or an outcome fund, similar to what Maya described, but that's focused primarily on community health. The outcome fund is based in Uganda and is currently supporting about 2,000 community health workers in 6 districts and reaching 1.5 million beneficiaries. We just launched this in October, and I'm actually very proud of having been able to do this, during this COVID-19 pandemic, despite all of the risks involved in terms of achieving results. Mainly because we feel quite confident that our program has pivoted effectively and quickly to be able to support community health workers to work differently with low touch or no touch protocols, with limited interaction, with virtual training, to really be able to function and deliver similar levels of impact that they were previous to COVID-19 in an environment where community health workers are really critical, and beneficiaries are more reluctant to go out of health facilities to seek care because they're afraid. And in this environment, the RBF, the way it looks, is very similar to what Maya described. We have outcome payers. So we have USAID, the Deerfield Foundation, and some other philanthropists who are providing funding to Living Goods to achieve these outcomes. We deliver against a set of performance targets, and when an independent verifier, Innovations for Poverty Action, comes in and verifies the results, we then get paid, the results, the payments associated with the results that we've achieved. The only difference in this structure from an impact bond is that we currently don't have investors on board. But as we continue to scale and the need for upfront capital increases, and we have also an increased need to transfer some of the risks associated with this mechanism at greater scale, we are certainly looking to bring on board investors who can give us some upfront capital to be able to implement this. Some of the key learnings that we've had to date, and the benefits of this type of financing mechanism for Living Goods over traditional grant-funded programs, is that this mechanism is really creating the transparency and accountability that a lot of new stakeholders, including donors, want to see in this space. And this includes, private sector stakeholders. Being able to show people exactly what it costs to deliver 1 unit of impact, and do that in a transparent way is really quite transformative for the space. And I think this has really changed the way donors view Living Goods and our program. They are excited to only pay for guaranteed results, and are really happy to be able to have this visibility into our historical costs and performance. It's also been really great because the outcome fund allows us to collect and bring together and crowd in resources from multiple donors, into one mechanism, and the program itself doesn't have to change to meet the needs of each of those donors, and that helps us to streamline our work and really be more effective. It also allows us to really innovate and be flexible. When we get results at the end of a quarter that show us that maybe we haven't performed so well on one metric, we're able to very quickly make adjustments to our program. We don't have to report against specific line items and budgets and go through a tedious process to change how we spend our money. We just, can spend it the way we want to and address the problem and move on. It also allows us to demonstrate in the long term, a model through which not just philanthropists and private sector players, but also local governments can step in to help contract out some of this work for their own governments. And so to conclude, Living Goods is really excited to have been working with UBS and other partners on this type of work and to be a thought leader and a pioneer in this space. And are really looking to continue to iterate on this design and scale up this results-based financing mechanism to the point where we can bring in private sector investors and really transition this to an impact bond.
Thank you so much, Maya. Thank you, Nayantara. I'm just looking at the questions that are coming through the chat, and Maya, I believe there's a question that is addressed to you about what are the reasons why education and health receive only a tiny percentage of investments, given that they are actually top of mind issues, not just for investors, but for people very broadly.
No, and that's a great question. Thank you, Renata, for asking that. Well, one of the issues with education and health is that they're typically not investable in that sense, because the returns tend to be either low because the target population doesn't have the money to actually pay for these services, or often actually health and education are typically areas that are managed by government entities, so they don't have a revenue stream. One of the advantages of an impact bond model is that it allows investors to come in typically uninvestable areas. So Living Goods or an Educate Girls that we worked with are actually non-for-profit organizations. They're not organizations that have a revenue stream. But by being part of an impact bond model, what it allows it is for investors to come in and have a financial return that is linked to the actual social outcomes that are being achieved. So the return comes from the outcome funders willing to pay a premium for results that are being achieved, rather than putting their money up front and hoping for results to be achieved.
Thank you so much. We have another question that is coming from Kash Chandarana about how many first round investors, i.e. the first risk takers, have not reached the outcome exit. What is the profile of these investors? Do they get a preferred ongoing return post-outcome, or does the philanthropic mindset kick in? So Maya, again, maybe could you elaborate on this with the differentiation between the philanthropic risk capital that is deployed and the investment capital that is crowded in?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so the way that it works is that the philanthropic investors provide money that acts as a first loss, so it absorbs the risk for the other investors. So that means if something doesn't go as planned, it is the philanthropic investors that would have their money at stake. But if you think about the mindset of a philanthropist, usually it would just be giving its money away. In this case, it's giving its money to be invested with the aim of at least getting its money back. And if there is some overperformance, it could also get some return. But the aim of a philanthropist is to make sure that its money is being deployed to maximize impact. In this case, it is not only maximizing impact, it also enables to crowd in other investors.
Thank you so much. So do we have any other questions? Here we go. Anne Cairns, what do you say to people who say, I don't see my impact? Who would like to take this question? Nayantara, would you maybe like to comment on this?
Sure. I mean, that's a tough question. I think, the idea behind these types of mechanisms compared to like regular philanthropist funded grant programs is that hopefully you don't have people saying this too often, right? Because you are setting up really transparent systems for them to see what sort of units of impact you committed to ahead of time. And then you are bringing in an independent verifier to verify that and make sure that actually you did achieve those results. And that verifier, is someone that both the outcome payers and the investors are really comfortable with. And because of the transparency and the accountability built into these types of systems, hopefully people really are seeing the impact that's being delivered. I think if performance targets are not being achieved and the mechanism is not working as it should to incentivize impact, then yes, it's a different question. And really, I think as an implementer, what we would try to do is to try to understand what the root of the problem is, whether the problem is something that we can solve internally by ourselves, or there are external circumstances that are making it difficult for us to work in that environment, and really try to move towards a solution quickly, so that and to be honest, this mechanism incentivizes us to move towards a solution much faster faster than we would, normally. And in that way, I think we would work towards really making it so that we are achieving those targets and delivering impact. I hope that helps answer your question.
Thank you so much. I also see that Elizabeth has indicated that she would like to maybe comment on this question.
Hi, can you see me and hear me now?
We can indeed.
Good.
Thank
Great.
you.
No, actually, it's not a comment on that question. I have another question for you, if that is okay.
Of course.
I was thinking, today we hear more women being more confident in sharing their stories and talking about philanthropy and talking about the need to support philanthropic projects. Do you think that something has shifted? What is your experience? You work with women who are philanthropists. You work with women who are there on the ground, like Nayantara. Nayantara, could you please keep your camera on so that we can see your lovely face and have you as part of the conversation? Thank you. And so you have those women who work on the ground trying to tackle the real needs. Do you feel that there is a mind shift in women being ready to share not only stories, but also that impact that they can create through philanthropy?
Look, I think the short answer to that is a definite yes. I think what is beautiful of the trends that we've been seeing over the past few years, and I think the whole COVID context has accelerated this massively, is that women are willing and able, and the industry is facilitating that they're getting much more involved in all wealth matters. From a philanthropic perspective, I think the dialogue around strategic philanthropy is expanding, and that is something that we have been committed to for many, many years now, because giving away your money for something that sounds like a good cause, or giving away your money for something that is actually going to materially impact people's lives is clearly a difference. And this is where we're seeing, already before the COVID crisis, 9 out of 10 female investors have always wanted to know, what impact can I have with my wealth? How can I do good? How can I support these programs? How can I facilitate that other women benefit? In particular, because I think data also from the United Nations, from United Nations Women, demonstrates that for every dollar that is invested in women in developing countries, 90 cents on the dollar benefits the community around them, benefits children, benefits education. So there is a very strong willingness, strong engagement. And I think the COVID context has accelerated that, because sustainability is really at the forefront of every discussion nowadays. And to realize that there are so many paths to impact that can mutually reinforce each other is what is most encouraging. And maybe Maya, do you want to further comment on that topic as well?
No, and I think what we're seeing is actually that women are the ones that want to be more involved philanthropically than men, and that are more into strategic philanthropy. And I think in the conversations that we have, I think there are some examples, unfortunately, where philanthropy can not only do good, but it could potentially do harm. So that conversation about what is strategic philanthropy is essential. And one example that I always have in mind was a campaign that was about distributing bed nets in Kenya. And actually, when an evaluation was done, what was seen is that bed nets that were actually supposed to be used to protect people against malaria were being used to fish in lakes. And because they were impregnated with insecticide, it actually were toxic for the lakes, and then had negative effects on the entire community. So there are really consequences of not doing your philanthropy well and strategically. And the engagement that we have with women on this topic is critical.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point that you raise. And another example that I would like to share, because that really stuck with me also in the past, is the topic of orphanages. And it breaks my heart a little bit every year to see that so many schools encourage children to raise funds at Christmas with their Christmas caroling and their concerts for orphanages. And while there might be indeed organizations that really do a fantastic job at taking care of children that have lost their parents, there are many, many statistics that show that 80% of children in orphanages in developing countries actually do have parents, and that they are being abandoned in orphanages with the hope that they will have a better future, but very often are just the victims of call it perverse mechanisms of what is close to either modern day slavery or child abuse for the sake of raising funds. And these are all examples of philanthropy that in the past was, I would say, common ground, but which today we would no longer recommend to clients, because we really take a strategic approach to understanding the root causes of a problem, how we can intervene with evidence-based solutions, and precisely as Nayantara was explaining, really understanding what outcomes we are striving for before building programs around them. So I see a couple more questions that I would love to address. Shouldn't children be made responsible from an early age in order to protect them from any sort of uncertain circumstances? Children are often unaware of the usage of wealth and resources. Lovely topic. Actually, one of my pet topics. How do we engage children in all matters financial? There are a couple of figures that I just love to share, and that is there's a lot of research that shows that confidence, especially in little girls, is shaped around the age of 5, and that attitudes towards money and your adult habits in relation to money are already shaped by the age of 7. So indeed, if we want to raise the next generation of children to be savvy about money, but about the impact that money can have on their own lives, given their longevity, if you're going to live for 100 years and pension systems are not going to support quality of life after your retirement, understanding how to deploy money is going to be a crucial skill set for children. And in particular, to understand that it is our daily money choices that can impact this world. And in fact, that is what is impacting our world today. And to be able to steer consumption decisions much more actively towards those companies that do care, and to be able to also later in life steer your investment decisions in the same way and select positively those companies that are doing the best they can to make a better world, to fix the environment, and to develop societies in a way that is more just and more fair. I think all of these lessons are super important, and the earlier we can engage with children on them, I would argue that is what we would like to achieve. Maya, Nayantara, if you would like to further comment also on the engagement of children in these topics, I'd be happy to hear your views.
Sure. I mean, just to say that, from the perspective of living goods, one of the things that we think a lot about is really how health is actually the basis of everything. For a child, right from a newborn to when it's the child reaches the age of 1 to when the child is 5. All of the steps of development and the very basic healthcare services that they need in terms of mothers being educated around breastfeeding, in terms of nutrition, and really making sure that they are vaccinated and they get all of their vaccines, particularly now in this environment around COVID. I really understanding that giving children that base before they turn 5 years old even is so critical to then being able to support them to get an education and then move on in this journey of being able to understand finances and how to deploy them. So really, it's very core and central to the way we think about delivering impact and the way many of our peers and entrepreneurs in this space are thinking about impact as well.
I think you raise a very, very important point, Nayantara. We tend to take it for granted in the societies that we live in here in the European context. But I do still have a vivid memory about 7 years ago now of my very first trip to Nepal to visit some of Optimus Foundation's projects on the ground, and we were visiting schools. And I was surprised by how tiny some of the children were. So I asked what age they were, because I thought they must be like 5 or 6 years old. And the teachers were saying, no, these are children that are 10, 11, 12 years old. And you could just see the consequences of malnutrition and health problems in the very early stages of their childhood development, and the lasting impact that that has on their lives and their ability to learn. And without a healthy basis, no child can really develop its full potential. So I think it's highly relevant what you're saying. And those investments are indeed the ones that just have the most positive impact on society over decades. I see another question that has come in from Anne. Are women more confident today to make philanthropic decisions? Maya, maybe can I pass that question to you? Are you seeing a positive trend there, that women are engaging even more than before?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what is really interesting is to see that it is actually the women that deploy more of their money towards philanthropic giving than men do, if we look at percentages. And in terms of the confidence, I think you can see it with women and you can see it with next generation. That interest in philanthropy is absolutely growing, and therefore the confidence to make decisions based on not only passion, but also based on evidence. And I think that's a fantastic trend that we're seeing, and the engagement that we're having with those women are, starting, I think, with usually, some pilot cases where they would like to test and see what the type of impact they can have, but then really evolving into much larger commitments and a confidence to not only deploy their philanthropy, but also look at, as you were saying, Mara, right? What can they do as a family, as an individual? How can they also look at the investment? So much more broadly than just how can they deploy their philanthropic capital, which I think is a very positive trend.
Thank you, Maya. The next question that we have is from Maria, who is asking, has the COVID impacted the conversations with investors around sustainability and impact?
I mean, I'm happy to start, and maybe Mara, I'm sure you also have experiences on your end. I think that the COVID has absolutely impacted those conversations. I think I always think about the fact that COVID has highlighted that we're only as strong as our weakest link. We need really everybody to be healthy in order for us to be healthy. That's the one thing that started with COVID. But what that has highlighted as well is that there is a demand for businesses and investors to take an active part in becoming a solution, in becoming the force for driving positive impact into the future. And that starts with the way that employees are being engaged. And that is something that actually UBS and society is looking at. How can a bank like UBS look at the way that employees and engages in employees in a positive way? How can the bank be really part of a solution in the way that it is providing opportunities for maximizing impact with philanthropy? How is it providing opportunities for maximizing impact through sustainable investing? And how is it really at the forefront of really changing that conversation, that it's not only good for society, but it's also good for business? And I think that is a key trend. It's about making sure that impact is being completely integrated within the business model.
Absolutely. And I think this also brings us to answering the next question. Do you think women have a different attitude towards philanthropy? Do men do it more for the status and power, whereas for women, it's really about what makes their heart sing and doing good for others? And I think also here in the context of COVID, there has been a visible difference between how women leaders of countries have approached the crisis and male leaders of countries have approached the crisis. So I would argue, yes, there is a difference in the way people think philanthropically as well. Latest, when the political debate turned towards, should we save more lives or should we save the economy? This is, for me, personally, a typical demonstration of outdated binary thinking, whereas the women leaders in other countries have risen to the challenge of saying it is not an either or. There is a way of doing better what we are doing so that we don't need to make those trade-offs. We just need to find a better balance. And let's hope that that trend will be heavily reinforced, because it is exactly what the world needs. Now, without further ado, with an eye on the time, because we have to wrap up shortly, I would love to take the next question from Christine Schulze. Could you describe the vetting process? How did we, as Optimus Foundation, identify Living Goods as an organization and NGO that we wanted to support and invest in and create this opportunity to crowd in investment capital? Maya, would you maybe be able to share a little bit more about how the collaboration with Living Goods came to life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think our vetting process is one where we look at, does an organization have a track record of actually delivering on impact? So, has it demonstrated that it can reduce under 5 mortality in this case? Does it have a track record of being able to improve learning? That's on the one side. Does it have the right management team in place? The way that you would also look at investing in a company when you decide whether you want to fund an NGO, you look at, does it have the right team in place? Does it have the right business plan in place? Is it an organization that has a sustainable model? So how is it going to be funded in the future? Does it have a diverse source of funders? The other thing is also looking at scalability. One thing is to look at, does it work in a particular circumstance in a small pilot, but does it have the ambition and the ability to scale? Because ultimately, if we want to have impact, if we want to be able to reach the SDGs, we need to be able to fund organizations that have the ability to scale. I think the other thing that is also critical for us is looking at how does it interact with others in the space? So does it have a relationship with governments? Does it have a relationship with other key stakeholders, so that the organization is not working in isolation, but again is working collectively with key stakeholders in the space to be able to deliver that impact? So quite a thorough due diligence process in terms of how we select our partners. And then I think what we really truly believe in is that it's a collaboration. It's not a funder versus NGO partnership. It's about how can we work together to be able to also provide more than just financial support. How can we, as a foundation, also provide support with some of our own networks, and how do we also ensure that the organization is set up so that it can then attract additional funding in the future?
Thank you so much, Maya. And I'll take a very last question, which came in from Maria. What are concrete ways that families involving all generations can come together to determine and craft their passion and purpose? So I think there are 3 dimensions to this. The first is really deeply understanding the value set of each family member, what drives each person, what do they care about deeply, and what is key for them in any collaboration with other family members and beyond. The second is deeply understanding each individual's goals, because they will not be fully overlapping, they will not be fully aligned. Different people and different generations will, of course, have objectives of their own that they would like to achieve. But understanding deeply the differences and the potential areas for overlap, I think, is a really solid part of the process that can really help families also come together. And then last but not least, understanding the different roles that every family member is able or willing to play in a process of defining a common purpose and engaging towards that purpose. What competencies, what expertise, what assets, what passion and what networks can an individual bring to the table, and how can each individual find their way of contributing that is most relevant and meaningful for themselves and also in the broader context. So that in short would be my feedback to that question. This is, of course, a journey. It's not defined in a day, but this is also the part of what makes our work so intriguing and why we are so passionate about it, because it really is accompanying our clients on that journey, understanding how you can shape your purpose, how you can define your purpose, how you can mobilize all the resources within your family and beyond towards that purpose, and understanding all of the innovation that is happening in this space that can make objectives even more achievable, but especially more scalable for that impact to really come to life in a way that the lives of many is improved over years to come. So with that, I would like to wrap up in the interest of time. I would like to thank Maya for sharing all of her expertise with us. I would love to thank Nayantara for showcasing the amazing work that she's been doing on the ground over the years and having so much impact on children's lives and people's lives in a way that is really there to last. And we're very proud to be supporting these efforts and these endeavors. And we hope there will be many more opportunities indeed to scale our blended finance solutions in collaboration with clients, in collaboration with many women, and hopefully also many men and other family members over the years to come. So a very big thank you for everybody who took part in this session today. And it was delightful to be invited to talk to you.
Thank you, Mara.
Thank you.
We will now end this session and we'll soon move on to the next session. We'll just we're off of this link at the present time, and we'll be going into another link in a few minutes.